Hi, so these are some things I've learned about Jell-O while working on a failed web series. I'm a fanthropologist. I do research on all sorts of things in the entertainment industry, and as it turns out, Jell-O is endlessly fascinating. A little bit about Jell-O. Jell-O is rendered collagen from animal hooves, horns, bones, that sort of thing. It takes a long time to render on a stovetop, and then you skim off that part. And this is how gelatin was made in the old days. Gelatin, as it turns out, predates all sorts of other things. And kings ate it, queens ate it. This was a really royal dish because it took a lot of time and a lot of labor and a lot of access to land animals and some sea animals in order to render this. And it was primarily used for savory dishes to preserve it. Later in the history of gelatin, it got cleaned up a little bit and sweetened and turned into really fancy desserts. You see historic molds and all sorts of really pretty patterns. And gelatin was this really fancy, aristocratic, hard dish to make, and expensive dish. This was a flex dish. And then in 1850s, the box gelatin came to the United States and made the ingredient more accessible. It made gelatin itself more accessible, but the process of making gelatin-based dishes, still a little bit more challenging and still aristocratic. And that's because refrigeration was still expensive. Around that time, you had to have access to large quantities of ice or early state refrigerators because gelatin required being made warm and then chilled cold in a chauffoir method that predates boxed gelatin. And then gelatin turns into Jell-O. We all know Jell-O as a brand. Jell-O as a brand starts to exist because the trademark for Jell-O was bought by the Genesee Pure Foods Company, and they went on this marketing warpath. They started marketing Jell-O as America's most favorite dessert, and they started capitalizing on this class aspiration of Jell-O as an aristocratic food. You can see in some of their early advertisements in Ladies' Home Journal that they glamorized travel and they glamorized royalty because that's what gelatinous dishes historically had represented. And then they started doing this even bigger content marketing warpath, sending out recipe books and teaching America how to work with Jell-O. And this ended up helping to proliferate Jell-O in American homes. And it capitalized also on food safety and food purity. As Americans became more and more aware of germ theory, safety and purity in food became a concern, and Jell-O came in hermetically sealed bags, and you can see in ads from 1916 that was a talking point. Lime Jell-O is a really big turning point for Jell-O, as I've learned, because lime Jell-O introduces Jell-O as a savory preservative. You could add vinegar, turn it into salads. This is really where the savory Jell-O salad enters American consciousness, and this is where Jell-O goes from being high class to very American in values. Jell-O has sponsored Lucille Ball's precursor to I Love Lucy, called My Favorite Husband. They worked with Jack Benny on a jingle. They even commissioned Norman Rockwell to do print ads. And so Jell-O became very, very American. It also had a really big role in wartime rationing because sugar was included in Jell-O packets. And so Americans didn't have to go into their stores of refined sugar in order to create desserts. And it was still being used as a preservative, both sweet and savory at the time. They repositioned Jell-O to be easy to make, so easy that children could make it, so easy that men who weren't traditionally in the kitchen at that time would make it. You can see kind of the sexism and ageism in these ads. But it was easy to make, which is a stark departure from the aristocratic roots. It was also cheap to make. You can see in some of these ads that when the house cook leaves her job, Jell-O is a dish that can be made. When the stock market crashes, Jell-O is a dish that can be made. You can see Knox. Knox is the competitor to Jell-O at the time, and the difference between Knox and Jell-O is Knox is known for unsweetened gelatin. Jell-O was known for adding flavoring and color. And as Knox positioned themselves, sugar is unmanly. Jell-O, as it turns out, was positioned as really feminine, and then declined. Jell-O died when the feminist movement came rising because you have things like the I Hate to Cook cookbook, which acknowledged that women didn't always like to cook. What a novel thought. Women don't always like to cook. Whereas Jell-O was still positioned as this really feminine thing. And a couple other fun facts about Jell-O. You want to know why Jell-O is hospital food? Jell-O is technically a clear liquid. It has a really low melting point, and so it's really hard to choke on. So it's hospital food. And then another fun fact I learned on this research journey is that it's the official snack of the state of Utah. They voted lime Jell-O as the official snack in advance of the 2002 Olympics, and the family values have transcended into, it's a really well-known base for Mormon cooking. And lastly, Jell-O Shots. We all think about Jell-O Shots. I'm sure some of us have done it in college, maybe some of us still make them, but the earliest recorded Jell-O Shot was Jerry Thomas with punch jelly made from fish bladder gelatin, and so think about that. you.